Joseph Jaffe. Why does that name sound so suspiciously familiar? Maybe because your secret screen name is Not Famous For You? What do you mean by not famous for you, Joseph? Chris Hansen here of Hansen vs. Predators. To catch a predator and have a seat with Chris Hansen. Now, Joseph Jaffe, I'm going to need you to have a seat right over there. I see some suspicious activity. Something about a television show, doing interviews, 200 guests, something like that. But Joseph, you are not famous. And the people on your show, well, they're not infamous like my shows. But remember, Jaffe is not famous. So let's keep it that way. I'll be watching and listening. Behave.
There was one guy I was dealing with getting a little bit pissy over the kid interrupting the call thing, and I'm like, appreciate it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please. Yeah.
My bad. Please continue. It's very alliterative.
They are going to be the ones powering the experiences that every customer has.
Preference has power. I'm pretty sure Cato would say to me when I do every show, stop.
I think he would.
Those pieces are popping. Wait till you get the invoice.
Here. I have a question. When's the last time you danced? When's the last time you laughed?
Right now. I don't want to dance with you.
When's the last time you flew a kite?
Toasted Oreo.
Look at you. You are insane.
How did I do that?
You're insane.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to you. It is February 14th. So, or maybe I should do I love you. Will you be my Valentine? I am on location. I'm at NYU. I'm teaching today. That's my ID. And it's a special edition of the show because I have a very special person in the studio. I have Dr. Sheena Mason. She is the author of Theory of Racelessness, a Case for Antiracism. I'm just fascinated, and I feel, in fact, she helped correct me a little bit. I was like, this is so interesting because I had Dr. DiAngelo who said, let's begin with the default that everyone is racist. And Sheena says, let's begin with the default that everyone is raceless. So from racist to raceless. It's going to be a great conversation, and she will be joining me very, very soon on location, if you will. Well, the rest of the week is a special week, of course. We have Kate Weltman in tomorrow, Jared Morris on Wednesday, and Seth Radwell on Thursday. Want to just do a little bit of a shout out. See, we've got a few comments. My mom is here from watching from South Africa. And I will be seeing you very soon. So prepare the table mountain. And Lakeisha Mason is here. Hello all, she says. And hello to you, Lakeisha. Hope you enjoy the show. And I'm sure, Lakeisha, you are no relation to Sheena whatsoever. Just a coincidence that you share the same last name. Well, I'm very glad that you are here today. On Friday, it's NFT Fridays. This has actually been pre-recorded with young Nick Small, 13 years old, put together an NFT collection, sold it out, ended up getting Steve Aoki to retweet him, only in Web3. Seems like anything really is possible in this crazy, crazy world that we're living in right now. Well, just as a reminder that I have a creator coin called the Jaffe coin, and the Jaffe coin actually allows you to engage with me, engage with the show, engage with each other. What's so interesting about the coin is that just by holding the coin, there are benefits to you. There are benefits in terms of access. You have the ability to buy NFTs. There are a whole bunch of ways. I'm trying to reinvent not just the talk show, but access itself, access to me, access to my guests, and access to each other. But as you know, this is never about me asking you to buy a Jaffe coin, which you could if you wanted to. This is about me giving you Jaffe coins. So today, every person that shines their phone on that QR code, it's the 14th. So you need to hold 14 coins in order to get 0.14 of a Jaffe coin. So it's all the 14s today. And this is going to be up for a while because it's Valentine's Day today. Normally I have the QR code live when the show is live. So if you'd like to get some free coin, all you got to do is use that QR code. And we do this pretty much every day on the show. What we also do, if you go into my Discord, and the Discord URL is a very simple one because the show is called Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous. And so my Discord is not famous neither or either. So if you go to bit.ly/notfamous Discord and you join the Discord, you will notice that there is a giveaways channel. And in the giveaways channel, you have the ability to get coin as well, but also this entire week, not today, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I wanted to give you a little bit of time. We're going to be giving away a Sketchy Ape, Book Club NFT, a Diamond Dog, and a Chibi Galaxy Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. All you have to do is subscribe to the show on, via bit.ly/subscribe to the show, subscribe to the show's channel on YouTube and paste your YouTube username in the giveaways channel, and we will be doing the drawing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I'm very excited to bring you into these amazing communities. I've had all of the founders on the show, and they all bring something amazing to the table. So excited for you to be a part of that. Final reminder, if you want to catch up, I will be off all of next week. But if you want to catch up on some previous episodes via audio, obviously video you can do through the archives on YouTube, but via audio, just subscribe, just search for Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous on any podcast network, and you will be able to subscribe to the show. Well, it's time for our seated soliloquy. And, I thought I would do something different. Normally, as you know, I'm going to do something connected to my guest. And we're certainly going to have an amazing conversation. But how could I avoid talking about the Super Bowl, or as I call it, the Stupid Bowl, or maybe I should have called it the Crypto Bowl, or maybe after last night, I should have called it the Crapto Bowl. I'm not really sure. But I thought it would be a good idea to give you a little bit of a debrief before bringing on my guest. And so here goes. Now, I got to tell you, I have been watching the Super Bowl every single year. And it just seems when you didn't think the bar could be lowered anymore, well, guess what? It gets lowered even more. It's unbelievable to think about how creativity almost seems to have gone AWOL. It almost seems like the whole of Madison Avenue, the advertising world, has given up on the ability to be creative in the Super Bowl. I'm teaching marketing right now. So I'm teaching about Apple's 1984 commercial, which aired in the Super Bowl in 1984. And guess what? It aired only once. I don't think there has been another commercial that has rivaled 1984 until last night. And this was the ad, what you see in front of you. It was like a Pong-like QR code that changed color, that literally hit and rebounded off the four walls of the screen. It was for Coinbase. And you know what? It basically brought down Coinbase. 20 million hits in 1 minute after this QR code literally for 1 minute just, bounced around the screen. Now, it did something else for all the geeks out there. It actually hit the corner. Everyone wanted to know if it would hit the corner, and yes, it hit the corner. Why do I think that this was such an unprecedented moment? Well, first of all, a lot of people said today was the death knell, the death of storytelling. No elaborate celebrities, borrowed interest, Dolly Parton, Miley Cyrus, all of the celebrities that we see year in, year out on the Super Bowl. Big, fancy, lavish productions. Instead, the lowly QR code, the return, the revenge of the lowly QR code. And something else, very, very interestingly, probably a spot on the Super Bowl with the lowest production costs ever in the history of television advertising. Nothing but a QR code. Now, why am I so enamored with this? Well, first of all, I'm kind of like into the whole Web3, the crypto world. So this is for Coinbase, but it was actually tied to a business objective. Fancy that. Actually using the opportunity to get in front of 120 million plus sets of eyeballs. And it didn't insult the viewer. People knew what to do. They went and accessed Coinbase. And Coinbase said, if you're new to Coinbase, you can set up an account. And if you aren't, you can still opt in to winning $1 million. So there was an offer, there was an offering. It was tied ultimately to a business objective. Folks, it's time that we actually realize that creativity, storytelling ideas need to be mapped to a bigger vision and a bigger plan. And I want to say one more thing. For people that think storytelling is dead, it isn't. Because if you followed the story on Twitter, the community took up the story. The community took the ball and ran with it all the way to the end zone. Today, there are all these memes and all of these conversations about what happened when I clicked on the QR code. I was transported to another dimension. I time traveled, etc., etc., etc. Creativity is in the eye, the mouse, the fingers, the eyes of the beholder, of the consumer. And so you may have looked at last night and thought nothing of it. But to me, it was a watershed moment. And I say kudos to all the folks over at Coinbase. And you know what? A big raspberry to the rest of the advertisers. And now it's time to not do a raspberry, but actually give a broad smile and welcome Sheena Mason. And I did ask her earlier if she wanted to be called Doctor, and she said, call me Sheena. So I will call her Sheena as well. Sheena said this, well, she's going to say to me herself, but she's commenting on her own show as well. She said the intro is giving me inspiration, and the Shade Tree Intellectual says, hey, Dr. Mason. And she says, hey, Steve. So you know what? I don't need to have a conversation with her via text. I think all I need to do is bring her onto the show. And so let me just give you a little bit of an introduction to her. In May of 2021, Sheena Mason earned her PhD with distinction from Howard University in Washington, D.C. She joined the faculty at SUNY. I don't want to get this wrong, but Oneonta, I hope I got that right, in Oneonta, New York in August 2021 as a tenure-track assistant professor in English literature. Her forthcoming book, Theory of Racelessness, A Case for Antiracism, presents a skeptical, eliminativist philosophy of race and racism that results in her signature Theory of Racelessness. She is the president and co-founder of Theory of Racelessness, an educational firm. Let's welcome her. Sheena Mason, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. That introduction is probably the best I've seen.
You might be on mute.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Or maybe I'm on mute.
Let's see.
Let's see. You know what? I think maybe I'm on mute.
No, you're not. Can you hear me? Hello?
There we are.
You can hear me?
I can. That was the weirdest thing ever. I think somebody wanted to silence us.
It was technology. It was definitely a conspiracy. I was thanking you for such an awesome and inspirational introduction. I love that.
Well, thank you. I am so excited to have you on. And, I love the conversation, and I love how, I don't even want to say provocative, more provoking. I think there's a big difference between being thought-provoking and provocative. And being provocative is fine too, as long as there's some people are just trying for the sake of it. I think there's so much sensationalism going on. One of the things I was going to ask you at some point is, what would Candace Owens say? What would, what would Greg Gutfeld say? What would all of these personalities say? But we'll get to that in a moment. First of all, I would be remiss if I didn't wish you a happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you. Same to you. Happy Valentine's Day for you and anyone listening.
And the Shade Tree Intellectual just said, hi, Lakeisha, who can hear us both.
Well, speaking of Valentine's, Lakeisha Mason is my wife and also co-founder of Theory of Racelessness. So it's not a coincidence that we have the same last name. I took hers when we got married.
Well, fantastic. Well, welcome to the show. It is also something else today, which is it's actually Race Relations Day. And I was actually kind of doing a little bit of research and a little bit of digging, and it seemed that that Race Relations Day also seems to track back to New Zealand, and is celebrated there. And this is actually, I know a little bit about New Zealand, that I would assume Te Rā Whanantung exactly is in Maori, but it says take a walk in someone else's shoes. And, that brings us back to Kill a Mockingbird, right? Don't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his moccasins. And I actually thought off the bat, like, it's very appropriate, but how do you respond to this idea? I mean, it's basic empathy, on one level, but on another level, this idea of really trying to understand life, understand the subject at hand, understand how confusing everything is by putting oneself in somebody else's shoes.
I think it's ironic, namely because in places like the United States, and I can't speak to New Zealand, though I imagine it's similar, the very belief in race actually precludes people from imagining oneself in someone else's shoes. You get a lot of speak about how I can't possibly understand your experience as a quote unquote Black person, right? Because I am white, so I can't possibly understand. I actually think that's to the detriment of having meaningful and healing and generative dialogue as it pertains to racism, because our belief in race, through our belief in race and through how we talk about and teach race, to talk and teach about racism, we're actually encouraging people not to be able to step in someone else's shoes, metaphorically speaking. So I do think it's ironic.
So how do we actually change that? I mean, and we'll jump around a little bit, but how do we step into someone's shoes if we're being precluded? How does one, empathize and be able to? Is it just talking? Is it the ability? Is it listening? Is it much more active and explicit?
Well, step one is to actually step outside of the confines that racism creates for all of us, which includes the categories of race. So part of what I do at Theory of Racelessness is I encourage people to see themselves first and foremost as raceless, as human beings, and to look at everyone that they come into contact with as also first and foremost human beings. There's a way in which race has been constructed and reconstructed over the centuries and generations that have precluded certain categories of race to be human. And, when we think back to chattel slavery and we recognize that the category of Blackness was written outside of humanity for the express purpose of justifying enslavement and viewing these people as animals, then it's not too difficult, perhaps, to understand how even in 2022, when we're still holding on to the race language and we're still racializing ourselves and other people, that tension between what's written into humanity and what's written outside of humanity remains. So the first thing that we can do to have more meaningful and generative conversations would be to step outside of that box that racism creates for all of us, and to see ourselves and each other as raceless human beings first. That's step one. And then from there, we'll be able to be more astute and clear-eyed when we analyze what race is doing when we see it in certain contexts, because there's a way in which race gets conflated with almost everything under the sun. It gets conflated with culture, ethnicity, social class, economic class, and racism itself is enabled to hide its face as race. But we can't see that if we're operating from within the categories. So by stepping outside the categories, we can do what I call translate race, or race translation. And we can be more discerning. What is race? Does it exist? Does it exist as a social construction? Does it exist in nature? And ultimately, if we conclude that it doesn't, and that other things are being conflated or mistaken as race, what is the value of disentangling all of these things? And of course, I conclude that the value in disentangling all of these things is that we recognize how racism is hiding its face as race. And so to undo racism, we have to undo race. That's step one. But if we continue to operate in the confines, it's that much more challenging and difficult for people to see that, because many people form a sort of emotional, even spiritual attachment to the thing called race.
So this idea of undoing racism means undoing race. In the news, obviously, very recent was a statement from, or a series of statements from Whoopi Goldberg about the Holocaust and about, I mean, her argument, and she hasn't been, we'll use the word canceled, but she's been suspended for 2 weeks, was talking about the fact that the Holocaust was not about race. It was about, man's hatred to a fellow man. And that it seems that argument is a little bit closer to what you're saying, but she certainly was not, she had to backpedal, she had to apologize. I just want to ask you one question, which is, when you look at the definition of racism, and of course, we're not talking about racism, we're talking about racelessness. But with racism, there is this, the definition, the dictionary definition is ultimately about a superiority or an inferiority, that one group is dominant or better or than another group as well. And I would just love to get your thoughts on this. It's difficult. It may not be difficult for you, but this was going to be my soliloquy today, which is, and so I wanted to still recognize you and recognize the, how you've inspired my thinking, which is, I said, putting the more in racelessness, meaning like we need to talk more. We need to be able to talk. We can't be afraid to talk. We can't be afraid what someone might say. We need to be able to say, hey, I don't know all the answers. I don't profess to know the answers. I may not know anything, but by talking and talking it out and being educated, and I know education is a huge part of what you do, we might get to a better place. So I know I gave you a lot there, but it's like a buffet. Pick whatever you want and respond.
Yeah. So the most paradoxical aspect of what happened with Whoopi Goldberg is that many Americans would have said similar things, but the backlash that she received, she became this sort of scapegoat. And most Americans would have said similar things because we are taught to see race and thereby racism through very black and white terms. But if you understand the genealogy of the word race itself, and you recognize that it goes back to early modern Europe, that in early modern Europe, race actually meant more along the lines of nationality and ethnicity. It was a class and caste system, which looked a lot like what happened during Nazi Germany. But if you don't know that history, then you're not going to know that race didn't always mean what we think it means today, which is largely, again, in black and white terminology. So I think it's unfortunate that that she received the backlash that she did, because it could have led to much more generative dialogue and discussion. But part of the hindrance in that sort of positive, as opposed to punishing mentality, comes from the fact that we see ourselves in the category of race, whether we see ourselves in the category of race as Jewish people, or whether we see ourselves in the category of race as more commonly understood in America, which is black, white, Asian, right? Because we see ourselves in the category, the emotional pull of the categories do obscure the illogic of the category itself, if you will. And it does obscure the fact that from the conception of the word race in the English language, it has always been used to define and maintain hierarchy in any society, in early modern Europe, and then in what would become the United States and what is now the United States. So by debating all day, was not World War II, was that about racism, or was it not? To me, that should be part of the conversation, but we're misdirecting discourse away from what racism is, which is really the belief that human beings can be or should be broken down into these so-called racial groups. That is the hierarchy itself. If so long as we're missing that, then we're missing the entire point. And we continue to stay in this cycle of believing in the fiction of race, either in nature or as a social construction, operating from within the fiction of race to fight against the fiction of race, which is very ironic. But there's an alternative. We can see ourselves from outside of the fishbowl. And we can come to recognize that the water that we've been swimming in, it seems like we need it to survive, right? We need race to live. It's part of my identity. It's part of who I am. It's part of who you are if I don't identify with the race, right? We think we need it. But if we get outside the fishbowl, we'll find ourselves in the ocean. And we'll actually recognize that the water we thought we were swimming in is polluted, right? So it's actually to our detriment to stay in the fishbowl. But because we're fish, we're really tricked into thinking like that's it. That's what life is. And the vastness and complexity of who we are as people is missed. But we can get outside, and we probably should. And I'm doing everything I can to re-educate people and help people unlearn their belief in race, to be more clear-eyed again about what race is, what racism is, and importantly, how to solve and heal from racism.
I mean, listen, nobody loves an extended metaphor more than me, and we could probably bring in sharks, we could bring in whales, but what I think is so interesting about the theory of racelessness and about your vision that you're bringing to the table is that it's not divisive inherently. I mean, your whole MO is about healing and unity. And I think it comes back to, one of the most ironically divisive phrases, on one hand, Black Lives Matter, on the other, all lives matter. And anyone that came forth with all lives matter got chastised, got, exorcised, got canceled. And I just want to, give you one perspective, which is my 14-year-old son asked me about it last week, funnily enough. And I gave him the textbook answer. I said, well, of course, all lives matter, but that's not what we say. And I believe it. I believe Black Lives Matter. I believe in saying not the right thing because people want to see me say the right thing, but I want to say the right thing because it's the right thing as well. And I said, of course, all lives matter, but right now, what we don't want to do is minimize the fact that that Black lives have almost been relegated, and people have not been. And I tried to educate a 14-year-old, and then I'm busy prepping for this interview, and I thought to myself, maybe I was saying the wrong thing. Me with my liberal leaning, thinking, I'm not necessarily about being politically correct. I'm about being correct, as in do the right thing, say the right thing, lead with integrity, lead with heart. And then you just kind of, I don't want to say schooled me, because I don't think that's how you, I was like, wait a second, there's a smarter, better perspective here. And so I just wanted to kind of, gently lob it back to you over the net, which is to comment on the Black Lives Matter, which is separating, versus All Lives Matter, which is unifying, and how that might actually fit into your theory.
Yeah, I wrote a piece in Newsweek on this very topic, Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, because it was right when the verdict for the Ahmaud Arbery trial was announced, and Ahmaud's father, in a moment of passion, he said all lives matter, right? And people across the political spectrum were taking it and co-opting it and fashioning it to prove their point, whatever their point is. But when you know the genealogy of race and racism, then you come to understand how it goes back to this concept of humanity. The category of Blackness was written outside of humanity. So when some people, not all, but when some people hear something race specific, such as Black Lives Matter, what they don't hear is all lives matter, because there's this sort of subconscious recognition that Blackness is written out of all. It's written out of humanity. And while everyone is right in some ways, right? Because asserting Black Lives Matter is radical, and it's part of the constant and consistent effort to reconstruct what race is and how it operates, so that it inflicts less violence on our citizens in the U.S. What is often understudied or recognized or understood is that there's an alternative philosophy of race that can take us across the finish line more efficiently and more effectively. So in the discipline of philosophy, there are 6 philosophies of race, and 3 speak to what a person thinks race is, 3 speak to what a person thinks should be done with race. And each of us holds 2 of these philosophies, even without having the language to say, my philosophy of race is fill in the blank, right? The first philosophy is something called naturalism, which speaks to the idea that a person believes that race is biological. Modern science has disproven this, but you still have some modern scientists insisting that race exists, right? But the value or the importance that they place on the existence of race differs. Then you have something called constructionism, which is how most people think of race. That, okay, race might not be biological, but it manifests itself in very real ways. It means something. It has some amount of realness. Then you have where I sit with my theory of racelessness, which is something called skepticism. Skeptics argue that race is not biological, and thereby it doesn't exist. This is the most challenging part for people to wrap their heads around oftentimes, because skepticism, most skeptics will point to all social constructions and say they don't exist, right? Because people created it. So they're real scientists. They're rooted in truth, as you were kind of just speaking about. But that's not why I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptic about race, and I say that it doesn't exist because I've recognized that across time and across place, people are calling something race or racial, but they're misnaming other things, such as I was saying earlier. They're misnaming culture, ethnicity, class, or racism itself. So in that way, for me, racism exists, race does not exist. And because we continue to miss that aspect of this, we continue to stay in the quagmire and machinery of racism, because the machinery of racism necessitates our continued belief in race either is something in nature or as a construction. And then the three categories of philosophy that speak to what a person thinks should be done with race. So the first that we've been talking about pretty consistently without naming it is something called Reconstruction. Reconstructionist efforts, this goes back to the creation of the concept of race in the first place. If at some point in early modern European society, the word race meant something more along the lines of family, lineage, class within European societies, it looked a lot different than how it looks today. But the thing that remained was a hierarchy. When you get to before the United States is the US and after, people start reconstructing the concept of race to include Black, white, of color, to include the language we more closely associate race with today. And they do that to justify enslavement. They do that to justify the racism that was already on the ground and in place. So then you have Reconstructionists like Frederick Douglass, who during abolition is trying to reconstruct what it means to be Black. He's trying to write humanity into Blackness. He's trying to write it into race. And then you have the Jim Crow era, you have civil rights, again, reconstructing Blackness to include our humanity. And then in more recent decades, you have the proliferation of the Black Lives Matter movement, where literally the assertion Black Lives Matter is an attempt to reconstruct Blackness, to reconstruct race, to insert the humanity that's already there, right? And as if you can't tell, this is a centuries-long project of reconstructing race and trying to assert the humanity associated with racialized Black people. So my contention is Reconstruction doesn't work, right? It's taken us as far as it can. And it doesn't work because so long as we continue to uphold the belief in race as something of nature or as a construction, then we're continuing to move the machinery of racism. We have a second option. There's also conservationists, which most Reconstructionists are conservationists and naturalists are conservationists. You want to keep race. And then there's the last option, which is something called eliminativism. And that's the second meaning of racelessness and the theory of racelessness. Eliminativists argue that the concept of race, for whatever reason, should be eliminated. It should be done away with. We should no longer uphold it. Usually they're going to be skeptics, such as I, but also there are constructionists who are eliminativists, like my mentor at Howard University. And those people work from within the confines of race to seek its destruction. I work from outside as a skeptic to seek its destruction. But either way, the goal of getting rid of this divisive category that was never meant to unify us, that was never meant to recognize everyone's humanity, we need to undo it for reasons that I hope are rendered clear. And so that's my analysis of the what's happening in the public sphere and the roadblocks that we each run into. Because on the one hand, it makes sense that people would take the race specific and uphold it and try to reconstruct because they haven't been given an alternative. Historically speaking, there haven't been an alternative, but there is an alternative now. And I find most people are compelled to be eliminativists, even if not skeptics, once they're presented with the evidence. And they just say things like, I just had no idea that was even a possibility, right? I didn't know.
But now I want to follow up on that, but also I just want to acknowledge a few people. Bradford White says, every time I hear the philosophies, I get better at articulating them to my friends and family. Making flashcards would be faster, but maybe there is a flashcard version. Also, because I don't have my mixing board here. If I did, I would have given you the applause, the air horns. I would have given you a whole bunch more with that. As I said, this incredible thought leadership. That it's not even thought leadership, but I love it. Healthy, constructive skepticism. Lubna is here, and she said this is fascinating. And Ogi Yamu says, my favoritist doctor, undefeated, never lost. Let's go. Hashtag racelessness. So here's my question. I'm going to ask it two ways. One is I love unlearning, the concept of unlearning. We all need to get much more comfortable doing that on every level. Let's say now I take this thinking, which I love, right? And I take this thinking as a white man and I start to preach this and I start to talk. Is it different coming from a white man versus a person of color? And my second, and this is more about how now do we integrate this thinking? That's the bigger question in order to unify and heal. Because the second thing is I'm thinking is, the Ben Shapiros, the Candace Owens, the Greg Gutfelds, there's a lot of sensationalists out there on both sides. It seems that this thinking, and tell me if I'm wrong, would be sooner embraced by the right than the left. So I would love to, I know I asked you like 58 questions in 13 seconds, but I would love for you to respond to that.
Yeah, so one common misconception, and I think this is part of what enables the machinery of racism to persist, is that the message coming from me is going to be received differently than a message coming from a person racialized as white. I still get hate mail. I still get called, I'm coddling white people. I'm only doing this for the white people. The super irony of it is beyond belief. I get it all. I get called N-word. Everything under the sun, I receive it. And yet people would look at me and racialize me as Black. Other people will see me as being mixed because I have a lighter complexion. And so they'll dismiss what I'm saying by calling me beige and saying, beige people doing too much, talking to the white man, trying to get accepted. So I get the entire spectrum of hate and disdain, if you will, and ignorance. And I think that the boldness and the audacity that I exhibit in embracing my own ideas and in sharing my knowledge and sharing my ideas and giving people alternatives is just part of my personality. I believe that this is my God-given life's purpose. And so taking the bull by the horns, and regardless of the fear, I'm sharing. And I've been pleasantly surprised and really overwhelmed actually at the very positive reception of my ideas that I've received from people racialized in all types of manners around the world. And I think that speaks to the fact that more people are closer to what I'm saying than not, which is good, which is a good starting point. And a lot of people, they'll resonate with my ideas because there's something in the back of their mind that's telling them this is ironic, right? This is not helpful. This is upholding the problem, but they just don't yet have the tools or the education to be able to say why or to say how. Or even more importantly, they don't have the solution and alternative to put on the table, at school or at their workplace or with their families to say, well, this isn't the best way to do things, but here's a different way to do things that can be more productive, right? Kind of like your anecdote with your son earlier. And when given an alternative, people generally take it. I will say that part of my work is ironic because many right-leaning folks resonate with theory of racistness. And I think because if we listen to people who lean right, and if we stop presuming that they're all coming from a bad place, right? This sort of bad faith argument, then what I hear them saying, many of them saying, is I'm okay with talking about the history of racism, okay with talking about racism. It's how we're talking about it that's the problem, right? I don't want to be painted into a corner. I don't want my children to be painted into a corner. I don't want them to internalize racism by convincing them that because they are racialized a particular way, this is the story of their lives, right? Or they're somehow culpable, or they're somehow oppressed and victims. People are speaking out against that sort of happening. And while in the past, what has been the status quo has included doing a whole lot of nothing as it pertains to racism, both teaching the complexity of the history and looking at how the remnants of that history still impact certain aspects of our society. The resistance I find comes from the fact that we're doing it from within the framework. We're doing this work and saying you're white, you're black, you're Asian, and then segregating and saying this is the history and this is your participation in it and stuff like that. And of course, that's not going to feel good. And I'm all for helping people be uncomfortable, because I find my biggest growth spurts come from my own discomfort and my own fear and still acting, right? But there's an alternative. There's finally an alternative now. We can actually analyze the same history. We can analyze contemporary society and be more clear-eyed about what's happening and what has happened from outside of the confines. And lo and behold, people who lean right, that's okay with them. They're like, yes, this is what I've been waiting for, right? Didn't know it was possible because I didn't have this insight or that insight, but this is what I've been waiting for. And people that lean left would do well to recognize that for what it is, as opposed to interpreting that as somehow underlining the hidden racism and theory of racistness or something like that, right? What we say is we want to unify. We want to do this work together. We want to bring more people in than out. Theory of racistness does that. And the proof is in the pudding. Most of my students lean left, in the college classroom. That just happens to be the case. The minority are going to be more conservative or right-leaning students. And all of my students, like 9 out of 10, right, end up being eliminativists within a couple of weeks of reading and studying the thing and hearing alternative perspectives. And similarly, people who support my work, my own podcasts and people I get emails from, they're all across the political spectrum. So this is working. And the people who are going to be resistant to it, that's okay, because we don't need 100% of people to buy in for this to make a difference. We just don't.
I have I'm putting up your podcast on the screen. I have a very simple way of thinking about life in general, which is a very, it's very much, there's always cadence of threes, right? Like red, yellow, green with traffic lights in terms of go slow, no go. But the other one is just thinking about past, present, future. And, when we think about past, we think about critical race theory and we think about education and understanding. When we think about present, this is how I would classify what I'm hearing today. Present is, how can we treat our fellow human like a human, and how can we really dial that up? But future is, and I would imagine that in theory and hopefully in practice, everyone can agree on a future where there is no race, where we are truly raceless. And anyone that doesn't believe in that, I mean, those are people that are ultimately looking to perpetuate a status quo that is not about unity and healing, that is about divisiveness. And I would imagine the people that push back on you are people that whether they admit it or not, want to perpetuate some version of the status quo, both on the left and unfortunately on the right. I say unfortunately on the right because that is and has been more racist, although you probably argue racism on both sides. As I said that, I'm correcting myself, right?
We're learning together in the moment. This is why I love.
I'm a student now. Remember, the best teachers are students, and the best students are teachers. Today, this adjunct professor is a willing student of yours.
I love it. Yeah, it's definitely, the right gets a bad rap for being historically the most racist, right? And we could argue all day about whether that's true or whether it's not. There's literally no way to measure it. By my own understanding of what racism is, I identify almost every single one of us as being racist, except whereas the tendency is to put some kind of morality on that identification, I remove that stigma largely by helping people see themselves as raceless and by recognizing this as more of a matter of fact, right? We all are in the same society. We learn it. You know, we're not born racist, we learn it. So it makes sense that many of us would believe in the fiction of race and then unintentionally, for many of us, uphold it. And the people that you're speaking about who would intentionally uphold racism, I do think that's a smaller percentage than it appears, largely because we're continuously thinking in these black, white, us versus them dichotomies. But it has been my experience that even people who are really lambasted as being like serious racists, when they engage with my work, I see that they're racist because they believe in race, but it's not this like evil, boogeyman that people make people who are racist out to be. And part of my ability to see that humanity really in all of us, right, is because I have a deep understanding of what this thing is, how it happens, why it happens. And again, that the vast majority of us are actually racist. And fortunately, we can overcome that. It's just a matter of time. I think what you're saying is true. It's inevitable that we will go in this direction of future making without the belief in race. And the people who really want to cling to it, they will do everything they can to stop that. There's a lot of money invested in maintaining the division. But I believe ultimately in us. I believe in our power and agency. And I believe that what is today doesn't have to be tomorrow just because it's been for a long time.
I'll say amen to that. Ogie says the theory of racelessness is so practical. The language is simple. It is humanity-centered. And as a theory, gives more answers than questions. We just have to listen and open our hearts. And the Shade Tree Intellectual says, the biggest difference is Dr. Mason's integrity. All others seem to perpetuate the myth of race, to line their pockets and to remain valid. So now I want to ask you, I've had Dr. Robin DiAngelo on my show, and she begins with her default is that we are all racist. That is a default. You're saying we're not actually born racist. I think probably she would say the same as well. But there's a point of departure, right? Because she almost would say, like, even she would look at me and she would say, Joseph, you need to begin from the position that you are racist, and therefore, in order to prove you're not, or in order to be anti-racist, you have to push off against the default, as opposed to say, I'm not racist. Would you agree with that position, or it seems you have a different position, or at least maybe instead of exacerbating the problem, you are looking at the solution? How would you respond to that?
Yeah. So what's interesting is, in your paraphrasing of your interview with her, you said that she says that we are all racist, and that's racist, and that's the starting position. But I would argue that her position is that all white people, that the we is white people, right? She argues that all white people are racist, and that's the starting position for racialized white people. I'm starting from the premise of we're all raceless indeed, which is a radical act of seeing ourselves outside of the box racism creates for all of us. And similarly, if I'm identifying and defining racism as the belief in race, either as something of nature or as a construction and the act of racializing other people and ourselves, then I am conceding the point that we're all racist, all of us. So not just racialized white people. But again, I think that the difference comes in tenor. It's not an indictment. It's more of a matter of fact. It's taking the wool off of our eyes in terms of how people have traditionally defined racism, that only racialized white people can be racist, for example, kind of problematizing and interrogating that. But more than anything, if you look at my core tenets, which I have a video on my YouTube channel, you'll see that of my core tenets, nowhere in there do I say that we're all, the starting point is we're all racist. I start from the radical point of recognizing one's racelessness today and the future making potential of seeing everyone as raceless in the future. That's the starting point, and I think that's one of the profound differences between what I'm doing in my work and Dr. DiAngelo's work. And I think that, not for nothing, that's going to help me be far more successful, because the model I'm beginning with is one of really centering humanity outside of racism. I think that's really crucial, and it sets the tone for everything else that comes afterwards. And it makes the dialogue about really hard truths and really hard histories, it makes it slightly easier, right? It's still hard, still challenging, but it's just different. And I would say that the difference matters.
Well, I'll tell you what is going to matter as well. And we have a few minutes left, and I have two things still that I have to cover with you. But Sheena Mason, Dr. Sheena Mason, has a book coming out. And all I can say is look out for the theory of racelessness, a case for anti-racism. And the best way to find out exactly when the book is coming out is follow Sheena by subscribing to her podcast, by connecting with her on Twitter and Instagram. And I will put all of those up right at the end. There were two things that I wanted to cover, and we'll go from the sublime to the ridiculous. But another part of my conversation, and just very briefly, I just wanted to get your point of view on this, is when I was talking to my son, he was asking these great questions, and what he was essentially speaking about was this idea of hiring, about this idea of, the argument, shouldn't you just want to hire the best person for the job, the most talented person, as opposed to whether we call it affirmative action or quota or now, what fits into diversity, the whole DEI frame. I just wanted to hear your point of view, because honestly, I've heard many points of view. I have my own point of view. I don't care about anyone's point of view or mine. I care about yours today.
Thank you. So this is something I think deeply about. And as you were asking the question, something occurred to me. So I've been a hiring manager. I worked for a company called 24 Hour Fitness. I lived in something like 6 different states working for them, worked my way up from a service representative lead all the way up to general manager. And the team that I had right before leaving to do my doctorate at Howard University was just under 100 team members in San Jose, California. Now, when I think back to my own hiring practices and what I learned both from my mentors, but then also from experience of hiring people that I probably shouldn't have made the decision to hire, and hiring people that ended up being, really thriving in the environment of 24 Hour Fitness and so on. Part of what I learned is, and what I'm reflecting on is, you want people who are qualified, certainly, but I think there's nuance that people from various viewpoints take out of this conversation, which is also that how you feel about a person within 90 seconds. And I think it's disingenuous to suggest that hiring managers don't also hire people that they feel like they like, right? Or feel like can get along well with the team and so on and so forth. So there's so much more that goes into hiring decisions. Whereas just looking at resumes on paper, a person can be perfect on paper and then you meet them and something is off about them, right? And that has happened to every hiring manager in the history of hiring. And so I think we need to bring more nuance into this conversation. I think the fact that, yes, you want qualified people, but when we think of qualifications, I think people default to, do they have the right degree? Do they have the right training? Do they have the right experience? Or what's their GPA and things like that? But qualified also means personality, characteristics, and that's subjective. That is going to be subjective across different hiring managers. And there is plenty of evidence that suggests that people who are like you are people that you're more inclined to hire. So I think we're fooling ourselves to talk about it in black and white terms of meritocracy, as if subjectivity has nothing to do with it, when we know that it does have a lot to do with who we hire. And in that sense, I think there has to be some more creativity in terms of how to help people tend to their biases, because we all have biases. And that's the work that I would like to help people with. It's ultimately to work with hiring teams and recruiting teams to stem the problem of racism where it is, so that that's not coming in subconsciously or consciously, God forbid, into hiring decisions. And if we can do that, then this talk about meritocracy and affirmative action and stuff like that will be a sort of non-issue, because we're getting to the root. And part of the problem that I identify in our society is that we're constantly tending to the symptoms through policies like affirmative action, through initiatives like diversity, equity, and inclusion, instead of solving the root of the problem. If we can solve the root of the problem, then we don't have to have those conversations anymore, right? And then there won't be this feeling of division or unfairness, and the presumption that if a person is racialized a particular way, they just got it because of affirmative action and they're not actually qualified, which I see people making that intellectual mistake all the time. We have to get to the root. And Theory of Racelessness, my educational firm, is committed to helping people get to the root so that we can not have the problem and have these problems in the first place.
Well, I always find, as I said, we would go from the sublime to the ridiculous and end on a slightly lighter note. I always try and find a quote, and this was the quote that I found, which was, and you've also got to know it's coming from Chris Rock. He said, "Yeah, I love being famous. It's almost like being white, you know." So I'm thinking maybe I should contact Chris and say, why don't we go with, "Yeah, I love being famous. It's almost like being Sheena Mason, you know." Maybe that's a better way to look at it. But certainly eliminating, you know, I love what you said. Just get to the root of it. Look, it is not easy. You know, it is somewhat circular. It's almost like a vicious circle or vicious cycle. But the best place to begin is quite, you know, what's the old saying? The best time to have planted an oak tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is today.
I love that. Yes, I agree.
So there is so much love going on in the back channel, I can see, with Lakeisha and Ogie and the Shade Tree. So I'm going to let them continue to have their love fest. On Valentine's Day, my love fest has been with you, Sheena. Thank you so much for the conversation. I know we had to go through various scheduling, but it all worked out. We always end with what Chuck Norris had to say about the guest. As I said, we go from the sublime to the ridiculous, and here's what he had to say about you.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
There you go, and I will be back tomorrow. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show, and if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.